I never got to say goodbye to my grandfather. None of us did. Today I drove by Municipal Stadium in Waterbury. My brother owns a home there, and it's the last place I ever saw my grandfather alive. Came to watch a football game. We lost, so my coach wouldn't let me say goodbye to him, but I'll never forget how he looked on the sideline. Past few months, because Nikki and Caitlin and the boys live there, every time I drive by there, I think of him. And our grandfather left us tragically. I tell my sons that my father had to do CPR on his father the night that he died. So we never got to say goodbye to Raymond John Gagain. With our grandmother Dolly, because of dementia, there was a fear of every goodbye being the last goodbye. I must have said goodbye to my grandmother many times, and I didn't know if it would be the last one. My kids tease me that I always tell stories, and I tell a lot of them about our grandfather. And I always wondered, especially these past 5 or even 10 years, what stories would we tell about our grandmother? To understand Grammy, you'd have to understand both Grammy and Grampy. I think of our house where we grew up in this town, and look at on Nicholas Circle, and I can envision my grandfather and my grandmother pulling in the driveway, because they live right around the corner, with white Corningware casserole pots covered with tinfoil coming in the door one after another. And Grammy giving orders to Grampy, go get the other one, you forgot this one. And after the Corningware pots came the gifts, all kinds of gifts wrapped. And even one day, I'll never forget this, they brought in a basketball hoop in our front door. And when I saw my grandfather pushing a basketball hoop into the front door, I thought, these guys really love us. They were a team. But Grammy, she was the one to stick money in your pocket when you were a kid. And she'd look you in the face and say, listen, buddy, keep it in there. You save it. And as you got older, those 1s and 5s turned into her sitting there in her fur coat with a pen in one hand and her checkbook, her bank checkbook in another. And she was writing you a check for something like a birthday or a wedding or whatever. I was a little fat kid when I was young. If you could have a shopping spree at a gas station like Cumberland Farms in Woket, believe me, I did it. And it was my grandmother that would take me in there and let me pick out as many Baby Ruths or Snickers or you name a candy bar, I had it. Anybody remember Caldors? The store Caldors? Well, we have iTunes today. Back then you had little singles, tapes. Every song that came out, if I wanted it, my grandmother and my grandfather would drive down to Caldors. Grampy would sit in the car in the white Riviera outside, and Grammy would take me in, and basically whatever I wanted, she'd say, get it. I don't mention this because of these material things. For me, it was the thought. It was the thought that counted. More than that, it was their desire to do well by their grandchildren. If the grandparents had a strategy, these grandparents were like strategists at the Pentagon. By the way, I live in D.C., so. Holiday dinners and birthdays at One Cliff Street, those were a Grammy operation too. Let's be honest. Grampy and Mario, they were always taking orders from Grammy around the kitchen. I could see them now with that brown stove, all kinds of casseroles in and out, the icebox cake. It was what life was. Grammy kept this operation going, even after Grampy and Mario passed away. Because Grammy refused to be imprisoned by her condition of dementia. You see, our Gram had a joy for giving. She was the most generous person I have ever known. If you ever hear of people that are selfish, she was the epitome of selfless. If Grammy enjoyed something, she enjoyed it with someone. I often hear of this term Ubuntu, which is an African word, a Bantu African word, which basically translates into English as I am because we are. Grammy was us. She was her husband. She was her grandkids. Nothing was more special to her than Raymond, Mario, her grandchildren. They and we defined her being. It would be like saying Aunt Loretta is not Aunt Loretta without Uncle Joe. I am not Johnny without Vivian or John Raymond or Eric John or Liam. Lenore is not Lenore without Ayanna. As a matter of fact, Grammy Williams is not Grammy without Ayanna either. Nikki is not Nikki without Caitlin. And Dad and Mom are not Dad and Mom without Rose and Jimmy Burns. Grammy was determined to be herself. The self she always knew, she always was, long into her condition, to the fact that we all started to feel guilty about having holiday dinners. We saw Grammy struggle. We saw her struggle to provide for her family, what she was able to provide in tandem, as a dynamic duo, as a team. I want to share a little story. Her second to last trip down to visit us in Virginia, you could actually find it on my Facebook in an album called, I actually termed it the Rest and Relaxation Trip, after Grammy's second husband, Mario, passed away. And I had this special badge to get into the airport because I was working at the USO as a volunteer for the military. And I'll never forget Grammy getting off the airplane. She had a yellow jacket on. She looked very confused. And she was carrying a suitcase that had a handle like it was a box. And luckily, I said, luckily I had this pass. And I went right up to her, and obviously she smiled. We hugged each other. And I was determined with Vivian to make sure that that trip was the most relaxing and most restful trip she ever had. But it all started at the Jazz Festival. Everybody in DC goes to a park on Friday night to a jazz festival, and they drink a lot of sangria and they listen to jazz. So we ordered a pitcher of sangria, and sure enough, Grammy pulls out a 20 and says, I'm buying this one. And we said no, and that was easy. But then we took her to a casino in West Virginia, and she dropped her wallet about 100 times, and we picked it up, and I kept sneaking money into the machine to give her more credits, and she didn't know. And I thought we were okay. But then we got back home, and she leaves all these dollar bills, 50s and 20s, on the counter. I said, no, I'm not taking it. And if you look in that same album, you'll see there's a picture of her kind of jokingly hitting me with a napkin at a local cafe there because we tried to pay the check. But this is Grammy, the epitome of Grammy. After that trip of rest and relaxation, she put more money out on the counter, and this was a brutal fight. I mean, she was furious. She wanted Vivian and I to take this money. Luckily, I had that pass where I could bring her back to the airport and get in, and on top of her suitcase was a little necessaire of all her bathroom items And I took all that money and I put it back in there. And I waited for her to walk down the jet bridge. And I yelled, "Graham!" And she turned around frazzled. And I said, "Don't forget to check your bag before you sit down." And she went, "You son of a bitch." And that's who Grammy is. Till the last day, generous and selfless, trying to stick money everywhere. Dementia is a nightmare. It was like flipping the script. It was caring for the caretaker, or being mom for mom, or playing the role of grandparent or parent, aunt or uncle for Aunt Dolly. The question is, how do you do that? We struggled. We all struggled. We wanted to be perfect. We wanted to be as perfect in taking care of her as she was with us, especially in these final days, these final moments of her life. Let's be honest, this was difficult to the very end. Our goal ended up becoming, let's figure out how to protect her. Our goal was to prevent her from dying by tragedy, or worse, doing so while killing someone else, maybe in a car crash or something. But I want to thank you, Dad, for keeping Grammy safe in the end. People will remember Grammy like they remembered Grampy. I've caught myself telling stories for the past 30 years about Grampy. I want to spend the next 30, 40, or even 50 years telling stories about Grammy too. Behind every man is an amazing woman. Behind every great man is an amazing woman. I say this because Graham's life and the stories that we tell about her will help me teach my sons, our boys, that there is an amazing woman behind every great man. That amazing woman was your great-grandmother, Dolly, your sister, Dolly, your Aunt Dolly, your friend, Dolly, your mother-in-law, Dolly, your mother, Dolly, your wife, Angie, our grandmother. I told Aunt Loretta just the other day, I will spend the rest of my life telling stories about my grandmother. Please do the same. We all hope that our children and grandchildren strive to replicate the strength, the commitment, and the resilience that our Grammy had while she was alive, and she lived her life with grace. It's hard to believe almost 30 years ago this year, we spent pretty much every weekend for more than a decade sitting in that pew over there here in St. Pius with Grammy Dolly and Grampy Ray. Each hug goodbye, each whisper of "I love you" in Grammy's ear, each feared possible goodbye forever was hard. But this today is the hardest. 30 years is too long, Graham. Go be with Grampy and family. Today we won't say goodbye. We will say until we meet again.